You're listening to The Lowdown, a podcast inspired by the creative people in the bass making community. I'm Frankie. I'll be sitting down with bass makers to explore what drives them creatively and to find out what challenges they face in the business of bass. Let's find out what it's all about. Let's get The Lowdown. Hey everybody, welcome to The Lowdown. Here we are again. Eric is here as usual. We're super stoked today. We were just talking a little bit. We've been doing pretty much nothing but builders up to this point, and now for something completely different. We are really lucky to have Robert Sledge here today, who some people would maybe know Robert Sledge from Ben Folds 5, among other things. So, welcome to our little show. Thank you, sir. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to it.
Yeah, welcome. So I guess first question, let's start with that and get into it. So talk a little bit about like early on, inspiration when you started playing. Kind of give us the background and the run up.
Well, I'm just it's funny. Like now it's a badge of honor that I'm going to say I'm ancient. I'm a kid of the 70s, right?
And here, man. Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, I grew up thinking, Grand Funk Railroad were gods, and Aerosmith was my favorite band. Like, I guess my thing when I came, it was I guess the class of 74 or something, when Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, and Cheap Trick would all tour together. They were the first sort of rock stars where I was like, whoa, those guys are serious rock stars. I was already sort of raised listening to the Beatles and all this stuff, and I love music a whole lot. And so my dad had an enormous record collection, and my brother collected stereo gear, and he wanted to have hi-fi equipment, and he collected records. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of music around my house. But I was really fixated on these rock stars, that were showing up on TV with really long hair. And so that was my first goal, to be one of those people when I was 10. I started playing, let me see. I played viola when I was about 9.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I was like, man, I'm gonna be Mozart.
Yeah.
I'm gonna learn how to write music really well. I'm gonna be, this. And then I heard, I don't know who it was that I probably heard Van Halen for the first time, and I was like, oh man, I should play guitar. I don't know. I played bass and played guitar, and my brother sang, and we had a band, and so I don't know. That's I think I'm gonna get off track now. So you asked me that.
No, it's not off track at all. That's awesome. I mean, it's funny. I feel like the viola gets a lot of I don't know, undeserved hatred. It seems like, especially violinists, oh, I hate the viola. I hear that a lot, and it's why? It's a little bigger, it's too.
I mean, they choose these things. Yeah. These orchestra teachers back in the day, they would choose things based on your size. So my fingers weren't small enough. It was always girls that played violin, and my fingers weren't small enough, so they would stick me on the viola. They're like, well, should you play the cello or should you play the viola? And I'm like, I don't know. But then I picked up the double bass in class and just started playing it, and the guy was like, what is going? And I'm like, yeah, it's like all my sort of folky neighbors who have classical guitars at home, I just sit around at their parties messing with their guitar, learning Barney Miller on their classical guitars, and so I already know how to play something tuned in fourths. That was just
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's cool too. It's I always, even though same started on electric bass, but then started playing upright after. It feels like, oh, this is a legitimate instrument. Not that the electric bass isn't, but there's just something about it where you feel like it has a lineage to it, or at least seems like it has more of a lineage.
Yeah. Upright. Upright was a thing I came back to eventually, and not that I would consider myself. I mean, I could play swing and country music and that kind of stuff, but I have terrible bow technique.
I know you play with a French technique. I saw that.
Yeah, I do. I play with French. I mean, honestly, I would like to switch to German because
That's my favorite. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I use more power, and also the thing can rest in your hand instead of sort of resting on the strings. That's the
It just always felt more ergonomic to me too. Like, you kind of like feel like your wrist and your hand, it just feels more relaxed. It maybe not so much on the lower strings unless you like kind of turn
oh
used to
right.
it.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah, you
you
kind
know,
of tuck. Yeah.
yeah. But other than that, though, all those other advantages that you mentioned are completely
Yeah.
it. You know.
Yeah. And the bows look cool too. They're sort of like really big, you know.
Yes.
But I would, if I started playing, I have a fiddle. If I started playing like fiddle, I would definitely, I would probably go back to playing French, but French upright.
But
Yeah.
but it's so cool to be able to like have the choice of playing, playing Piz or Arco. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
Like being able to like play sustained notes like that and do something. It's just it's just way different than what you could normally
Oh
do
yeah.
on electric bass. Just opens up some avenues, melodically or whatever. So the bio you sent over, you said you actually worked over at Roscoe Guitars for a period of time. That's
I did.
super cool.
Well, here's the thing. So here's the background on Roscoe. You may not know this. On Tate Street in Greensboro, North Carolina, that's sort of like the college street for UNCG.
Yep.
And back in the 70s, Roscoe was a hippie, and like he had this great space upstairs, and he had a place called the Guitar Shop, and then next door was the Music Loft. And the Music Loft became a chain of stores in North Carolina. But the Guitar Shop really that Roscoe ran was like the place where everybody went and had their guitars worked on. And so Roscoe was just that guy. And so my first experience with modding guitars and having, people were routing things for Kahlers and Floyd Rose. He was kind of the Kahler guy. I don't know why. So quite a few people were getting Kahler vibratos put in their guitars, and he was that guy. And so it was funny, he went straight into making odd shapes and pointy shapes instead of doing Fender style things like they're doing in California. And so yeah, that was so I worked for him at that space, like in 1990 or something like that. And that was cool. I mean, I was what he would call a sanding monkey. I just sort of sanded stuff. I couldn't mess anything up too bad. I would just sort of do some finish sanding and some buffing. And he had these terrible monkey grip guitars, I mean, it's like a Steve Vai, Jim that has a monkey grip. Roscoe had this LG shape, like a Roscoe LG, but with a monkey grip in it. It was horrible. And I had, to finish sand these.
I can't even imagine what kind of
worst thing in the world. But it was like a lot of Bartolini pickups, and he would make an LG that had like 3 Bartolini J pickups in it, and like a preamp. And it was he made some really, really cool stuff back then.
That's cool.
All painted, no fancy woods yet.
Gotcha. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I guess especially when you're starting out as a builder, I mean, in fact, I think we were talking about this with our last podcast. It's kind of like you want to start on wood that you're not going to feel horrible about if you destroy it, or make a mistake. So it's better to have something plain that you can paint than have this really incredible piece of wood that if you, ruin it, you're just going to feel awful.
I think too, it was like like his period when he started making it was after, it was I guess sort of probably a backlash to the Alembic,
yes,
as fancy top kind of hippie sandwich looking aesthetic, which is a beautiful thing, of course. But that hadn't come back in fashion yet. Instead, it was like, actually he had a painter. I don't know if the internet will even show, whether this stuff exists on the internet or not, but he had a painter named Eddie who would paint all these sort of risque ladies on guitars and stuff. And so he was selling a bunch of stuff locally. It was a really cool time in North Carolina because, the furniture market, there was a lot of industry. The furniture market was still really strong. There was still a lot of jobs in hosiery mills. All the PA systems and guitars and everything were being made locally. It was wild. It was like this, the time I came up in was like a lot of stuff was just things it was kind of expensive, but you could buy really good stuff that was made locally.
Yeah, that's incredibly unusual. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, it's come back to that now. You can find really good stuff, but it was definitely a period where, I guess late 90s through the early 2000s where you just, there weren't that many local, I don't know, or not that many people were playing local made stuff.
You mentioned the pointy guitars, and maybe I might be misremembering, but early on with Ben Folds, were you playing like a hammer? I think
I was.
I
mean, it was kind of funny too, because like the minute I think the 80s were the best because like I swear to God, like New Year's Eve 1989, everybody was like, oh, good riddance, the 80s. And then the next day they had an 80s dance party. Like everybody had missed the 80s immediately. And it was like immediate nostalgia for this superficial period where everything was artificial and strange. And like, so I was like, oh, I'm playing my ironic pointy bass. But that Hamer Explorer was a super light Honduran mahogany body.
Yeah.
That was an amazing instrument. The neck got broken on it twice. So it didn't last, but it was amazing. That was an incredible bass.
Yeah, because if I remember, those had also sort of an Explorer headstock, but you had like a little bit of kind of a lip on it. But I don't think they had a volute, right? They're kind of like volute-less, kind of like how Gibsons are. So if if it fell over you, it could break really easily.
Yeah.
But no, you're right though. It's like it kind of like the bass that I like immediately like associate with like Rick Savage and Def Leppard and
exactly.
And here's a guy in a band who basically looks like a jazz trio and just rocking the hammer. I just think that's awesome.
Oh yeah. That was fun. I mean, it's just fun to sort of genre hop and to kind of mix things up. I mean, but it was way better than any Fender. Like, it's really hard to. And I didn't understand also that I really love the PJ setup, and I kept trying to play jazz basses, and this is just me. I'm like, man, I want to look like Bootsy or Larry Graham or something like that. I want to play some cool bass with like block inlays, and I kept trying jazz basses, and it's just it's just not really my thing. So that Hamer with the PJ, that was a really cool thing. And also, I have to say this about wood choice, and I know it's dangerous because some people get all crazy about what woods sound like, but I know what some woods sound like, and they sound like what I think they sound like. And mahogany has where the low end fundamental peak is. It's perfect for pianos to blend with a piano. I mean, and I guess the fusion people kind of discovered that a long time ago. Alphonso Johnson, somebody like that. A lot of those people would play mahogany instruments and stuff, but yeah, that sort of like, instead of that scooped ash or the broad alder, the mahogany has a little punch down there.
Yeah, like it's kind of like a thicker lower mid-range, basically. Like it just has a different voice.
Yeah, somewhere around like 120 or something. It just goes bam.
Yeah, and again, and generally that's true. And of course, then you start fiddling with what materials the bridge is made out of. And,
yeah.
But that also will start affecting dynamic range as well as just total range too. It's just kind of all over the place.
It's funny. I think bridges are like converters. Like I've done a bunch of studio work, and
it's a great way of saying
really worrying about like the converters. And I so I was into Pro Tools like pretty early, and like I was like, oh man, should I go with all Apogee converters, right? So I got these Apogee converters, and it really took like a year for me to hear the difference between the sound of my studio and somebody else's studio. And then when I switched converters again, I'm like using RME stuff. I'm like, okay, that sounds different, but what does it sound like if I use it all the time? What do my records sound like? It's the same thing, I think, with materials and bridges. You can't just go on a forum and be like, I empirically know that there's going to be more sustain.
Right, and that's
With
it.
a die-cast bridge on alder, you know, you just don't
Yeah.
know. You have to have it in context for like 6 months or a year, and then you can go, you know, I like it more.
Yep.
That's all you can say.
And honestly, that being said, even not even just like, you know, comparing alder to swamp ash to northern ash to basswood to, you know, to mahogany to true mahogany to, you know, also even if you like you take different cuts of woods from different parts of the tree depending on, you know, 'cause everything's compressing differently, you know, because of how much weight it's supporting and that sort of thing. I mean, you can get kind of, you know, different sounds. Again, it's a subtle thing, but theoretically from the same damn tree, you know. I mean,
Right.
that's what's crazy. um
Yeah, I mean, I think too. I mean, I guess it's probably I'm like all over the place now, but I think like
cool, yeah.
a lot of builders, well, like say like Michael Tobias or somebody like that, and not unlike Keith Roscoe, they will be using Bartolini stuff kind of exclusively, where they did for a long time.
Yeah.
And because I guess it gave them another set of controls, it was like consistent, you know, because there all this other variety going on and inconsistencies in wood and that kind of stuff. And their recipes might change, but like at least they can control that. That's my thinking on that kind of thing.
Oh no, it makes a lot of sense because, you know, honestly, up until say, I don't know, maybe like 15 odd years ago, you know, Bartolini really only had like one series of pickups, you know, so what they would call their original series or deep tone series.
Yeah.
That was just the sound, and they probably make more pickup shapes than anybody out there.
Oh,
So if you're a builder and you're making something and whatever amount of strings you have or whatever it is, I mean, they probably make, you know, make that shape, whereas as others don't. So it just works. But yeah, it ends up being like the one consistent thing. Like, you know what you're going to get from that pickup, be it a jazz pickup or a P pickup, or maybe it's a
Yep.
dual coil or a quad coil. You know, it's like you know what to expect from it.
yeah. I
It's,
tell you,
it's
I'm the worst person in the world to talk to. So like when people ask me questions about like the new kid on the block, like, what do you think about this new pickup builder, this sort of like pit face, you know, bull house or whatever the name's like, and I'm like, they're like, so much better than Bartolini or so much better than Seymour Duncan. I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, those guys those are the OGs. They've been making pickups forever and they're really good. Like, I want some guy in his garage to make great pickups and people like it. And people like to be friends with this person, you know, and that's amazing. But Seymour Duncan is the man. I mean, he is
oh my god,
amazing. The Bartolini, like, that's amazing what they've done. You
well,
know,
I mean, it's crazy. Like,
Right.
and again, what, you know, that's the cool thing too, is like, what is better, you know, right? I mean, that is so up for interpretation.
yeah,
You know, ultimately, if it sounds great to you, then it's better. But like,
that's right.
I mean, you know, Duncan, for instance. I mean, my gosh, they bought winding machines from the original Michigan Gibson factory that they wind like Gibson PAF reproductions on. So like you
Right.
literally get a pickup that's more authentic than you can get from Gibson from Seymour Duncan. You know,
Yeah.
made on the same machines and the whole bit. It's just, you know, his knowledge is just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and also about pickups too. Like, I mean, like I would say like Bartolinis are probably, I have a soft spot for them because of the Roscoe thing. I was able to
Sure.
put Bartolinis in multiple different instruments and hear my instrument change in a cool way and sort of be more hi-fi all of a sudden. And I was like, this is great. But like, I know that I'm sort of a child of DiMarzio's because I'm from the 70s.
Yeah, I hear
And
that. Yeah.
and I want to think like, oh, in the good old days, everybody had Al Nico pickups, but I'm not one of those people. Like, I grew up playing these like inexpensive Japanese basses that had DiMarzio P pickups in them, and
Which are great.
I had a great time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm all over the place. Like I say, like, you know, you ask me a question. I kind of like everything, you know.
Well, that's it.
I'm making good music on it.
Well, that's it. I was reading some of your bio, the fact that, you know, you've done, you know, you basically went from, you know, learning the bass at 11 to like playing prog rock to playing, you know, basically, you know, thrash funk,
Yeah.
yeah, playing jazz, you know,
Sure.
it's just, just very eclectic. And I think for the most part, it seems like I meet a lot of bass players that are like that. We kind of like lots of stuff.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, I definitely got into, I guess, heavier music, like
Sure.
Mostly kind of punk tinged metal, which kind of became thrash metal, and then California had this amazing outpouring like in the late 80s with like Fishbone's
incredible.
Primus and Jane's Addiction and the Chili Peppers, and that was a huge influence on me. Like so that was just right up my street, So I already had when I was a kid, I used to sit around like learning how to play Yes records and Rush. Rush was a big thing, and I learned a lot of most Rush, and I learned how to play a lot of Yes, like a few different records all the way through, and I really like Jimmy Johnson, his period with Alan Holdsworth and Jeff Berlin, and that Bill Bruford, Jeff Berlin, Alan Holdsworth lineup. That was a huge influence on me, and I learned what I could from that.
Well, that's it. That music's like an education,
Oh man, yeah. Actually, I'm a huge fan of the Dixie Dregs too. That was the thing. I was really happy that there was this Southern band that was like sort of like our Southern Mahavishnu. That was
that's a great way
so good, And they were like the Allman Brothers. Like everybody had a story about the Dixie Dregs, the same way they had a story about the Allman Brothers. Like in the South, everybody's like, yeah, I met Greg Allman and he stole my girlfriend or something, like I hate that guy. And I'm like, he's a pretty good singer though,
Yeah.
But
have my girlfriend. Like just sing me a song.
Come and go, but the Allman Brothers are eternal.
That's right. That's right. See that's a big picture kind of way of thinking that I think, for the most part, more bass players. That's why I think so many bass players like are producers too. You kind of think, you're like kind of like taking everything in and really thinking about your role, in that song and trying to like do what you can to make the song great and give it what it needs, basically. That's how
Yeah, at this point you need to interview my brother, because he'll tell you that like I would get kind of hard. Like I would run band rehearsals. We practice at my house, and I would run band rehearsals, and I still get a little Sergeant Sledge on people when people aren't using their time wisely.
Sergeant Sledge.
I'm like, I think we got in this room to accomplish something. Am I right? Like, I get a little like that. We need to make good use of our time and get on and play a gig. And, I get kind of workman-like, unless I was trying to write a song, then everybody just needs to shut up and wait.
Everybody wait. Well, right. It's great to have fun. Like we're having fun now, but at a certain point, you get everybody together in the same room. At some point, something has to get done.
Yeah, I mean,
that can be fun.
Yeah, and to your point about being a producer, that's the origins of that sort of organized approach to getting some music done, which is really like a lot of people is really appealing. A lot of people are like, my band is just all chaos, and can I please come over to your house and record? I'm like, sure, and we'll do a session, and I seem to have all the gear and know how to use my time.
Right. And sometimes, there might be something, you can say something to somebody in the band that maybe somebody else in the band couldn't say to somebody in the band, it gets something out of that, right? Because it won't be a personal thing. It'll be more like a creative choice kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, when Pro Tools, like I was during that sort of first, wave of people, and I would just be like, hey, I mean, y'all have got 5 days. Y'all got 5 days of recording, so I can't do 4 days of guitar solos. So we're just going to do a best of, and I'm going to comp it like in the next couple of hours, and that's going to be it. And of course, the guitar player's like, "Oh my God!" And I'm like, "So maybe you should consolidate your ideas and lay down the thing that you want to do." And everybody's in the background going, "Keep saying that. keep saying that to that person. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of times when I was the bad cop, and I would be like, hey, you need to make a point.
It's a hat you have to wear. I mean,
Yeah.
it's about, and it's
Yeah.
sometimes I think that interpersonal relationship with members of the band, that's probably just as important, in terms of getting things done and getting across creatively what the vision is. You need somebody to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, of course, I understand what it's like to sort of like really woodshed an idea. And sometimes it takes a long time for you to feel like you're done with it and all this stuff. But, every different approach works. There's no wrong approach, but, you gotta try a few before you get it right. Because I mean, we made a lot of records. Like, I mean, we made a lot of tracks in Ben Folds 5, and sometimes everything would just feel like perfect. I'm like, this is going great, and Ben is sort of like looking down into the piano, like he's not accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish, and I'm like thinking to myself, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, how can he, but it's just not. It's not checking all the boxes for him, so I had to be available, for him to work that out until, he's satisfied, otherwise it's just going to be miserable. I don't want to go on tour with that guy who's just like, I'm going to hate forever that we laid down that track on that record and I have to play it every night wrong, so,
Right.
yeah.
I can imagine, you're writing a song. It's kind of like your baby, essentially.
Yeah.
So if basically you made your, maybe you thought your baby was a brunette, now it's a redhead, or whatever.
Yeah.
It just isn't what you wanted. It's about having the vision that you wanted or intended or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's all indefinable, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, whether we're talking about producing or running a business or whatever, or writing a song, I don't know. I mean, I think that it all, as long as it's all in the service of the good that you kind of want to create. If you're trying to, if the big picture is that you're trying to sort of move your good idea forward with a crew of people that you really like, then sometimes you have to take a couple steps back to do it right, and sometimes you have to speed it up.
That's right. During the pandemic, like, what have you been doing, like, during the pandemic, in terms of like musical stuff? I mean, obviously it's been hard to get a bunch of people to go into the studio.
Yeah.
Different worlds,
I've done a few sessions that were just sort of limited amounts of people. I'm really fortunate. I have a studio literally in my neighborhood. In Chapel Hill, I'm super fortunate. Though it may not be the center of the music world as much as it thought it used to be, there's still a lot of people here that make a lot of music. And there's a studio called the Rubber Room here in my neighborhood, and I can go up there and play on people's singer-songwriter records all the time. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of a band called Mandolin Orange. They're like an Americana kind of folk band.
I'll check it out.
And they're literally my neighbors. I mean, they used to live right across the street from me. Now they moved down the street, but all their early stuff was made at that studio up the street. And there's a big bluegrass scene. So there's a lot going on around here, and I'll occasionally pick up a recording session. She said, during the pandemic. And also I've been working on Surrender Human, which is a band that I have with Matt McMichaels and Tony Stiglitz, and that's sort of like an 90s style indie pop band, and I do all the recording for that. So we finished a record and then kind of put it out right as the pandemic happened, and then we've been doing singles, just remote recording stuff that we already had, songs that we already had put together. But I think that's going to be ongoing too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's in some ways, like you're talking, like having in some sense having the time restrictions of actually going into a studio, like a studio you're paying for time in, can be a good thing in terms of that good pressure of getting something out. But at the
Oh
same
yeah.
time, sometimes it's just nice to go, hey, I can just let this take the time it needs to take to gestate and become something great on its own time too. At
Yeah.
home. So
Yeah, I like it all. I mean, I
yeah,
kind of think that it it's really good for people to work out their sound at home, and learn how to do it without an audience.
yeah,
And it's definitely a skill, like playing with a metronome is a skill. How to be yourself, even though you're playing with a metronome. How to sound like a human being, even though you're being on a DAW, you're playing
right.
on a DAW and playing in a way. That's a huge. I need to have my own podcast about this. But like,
Yeah.
so there's a lot to be learned from playing remotely that I hope that we're gonna take into. We have to. That's what's going to happen. We're going to
Oh,
take
yeah.
into this sort of post-pandemic kind of time. But a lot of people I know are getting their workstation chops together and getting their equipment, pro enough to release tracks or to contribute to tracks, and that's been a really good thing.
Oh, indeed.
I think drummers have it the hardest. Drummers and loud guitar players.
Well, right, especially like with loud guitar players, where part of their sound is the fact that they don't think they can get their sound any other way other than like just pushing the tube amp to its limits, and there's no other way to get that sound as far as they're concerned. I mean, then you're gonna have a hard time.
Yeah, I really have cracked that. I figured that.
Yes.
I know it's not true. I just saw a podcast where a guy from Jensen was talking about the way speakers react, and he was saying that this is him. He was saying it's absolutely not true that speakers are going to sound better at a certain almost push to their limits.
They have right. There's a sweet spot with them.
They have they have a really wide sweet spot between basically pushing like 1 watt. That's fine, and pushing like 2/3 of their total power. That's fine too. So it's more to do with the front and the back end of the amp than it is to do with the actual whether or not the speaker is saturating this. If you want a loud room, that's one thing. You can have a ribbon mic in a loud room and you're getting it from front and back, or an Omni mic or something. That's another thing. If you really want to make a room vibrate, that's a totally different thing. But the speaker itself saturating, I just think that guitar players are making themselves deaf by trying to play too loud in a room when they could be doing other things. They, you could just run a really high gain pedal into the front of their amp and then record it quietly, at about 70 dB. And believe me, I've done like thousands of experiments on that, and it's just fine.
Yeah, and
just fine.
And there's certainly no shortage of great load boxes, to put between heads and speaker cabs at this point either. I mean,
and there's excellent simulators being made now.
Yeah.
I think the aux box is amazing, and a lot of people are tweaking those things to get really excellent results and stuff. But I have to say that I don't even think they need that. I
agree.
I think it's cool to buy new stuff and to change things up and to get new sounds for sure.
Like if you're recording at home, like what's your signal chain like?
I have kind of a mod. Like I got into modular synthesizers really hard a few years ago, and really wanted to modularize all my stuff because I have lots of different kinds of gear. So what I did was modularize my bass amp and my guitar amp system. So I have I'll do 2 different mic or DI sources at any given time, right? So it's all modular. So I can run a ribbon mic on a guitar cabinet and a condenser, or a DI and a DI and a mic. But most commonly what I'll do, I have a Demeter preamp and I run that into like a crown amp, and I have an amp cabinet switcher. Yeah, so I have one of those, and I have a few different cabinets, and so I could switch between cabinets at any given time. But so I run really hot signals into my Demeter, out into my crown, out into a couple of different sort of guitar cabinets, and I never run anything above 80 dB. I'm always really hitting the front end of the amp really hard. And I use a tube condenser on a guitar, a little small guitar speaker, and it sounds great. I've done it with 12-inch speakers, I've done it with 15-inch speakers, because I've got all these things on a switcher, and I can literally just move the mic stand up or down to hit different cabinets. I have various DIs I can use too. I have like those old triad transformers that they put in the Acme DIs, like the Motown. I was fortunate enough to just get some of those original DIs. And so I have those, and so I can intermix that and Jensen DIs. And so I have a lot of different stuff, but most of the time it's a Rode tube mic with an old Telefunken tube in it, and a guitar cabinet.
That's very cool. But it sounds like you basically have everything kind of like set up and ready to go, so you can just basically choose what you want to be active, essentially, and go for it.
That's right. And there's just a pedal board sitting on top of a Rode case, and I just kind of reconfigure the pedal board to get whatever sound I want into my Demeter preamp, which is kind of like a dual Showman. That's a Showman circuit. So it's very Fendery. When you hit bright, it's just it sounds exactly like a Fender to me. So
yeah. Well, I started getting into electronics a little while ago, and the thing you start finding out is that pretty much every amp in existence is kind of like a variation on some other amp, basically.
The Marshall is like a variation on whatever, on I can't remember which Fender, but and then the Fender, of course, just a variation on an RCA radio.
Yeah, which makes total sense. When you get right down to it, you kind of see the evolution of it, essentially. To me, it's kind of neat that like distortion ended up being a thing, something that, designers of that equipment certainly probably wanted to avoid, and it ended up being something they're like, oh, that's, that sounds cool. It just kind of took off.
I saw that great Origins of Fuzz that Josh Scott, is that his name? From JHS.
Yeah, he's awesome. I love
Fuzz. Yeah, and he was talking about the broken channel in the console in Studio B, maybe in Nashville, which I've been to a lot, actually. Not that they have that same console, but the Marty Robbins track that has the original fuzz on it, that's amazing. Somebody should actually make that thing, instead of remaking the Satisfaction box over and over again, the Maestro fuzz. Just saying, somebody should do that.
Maybe that's something that
maybe that's what I should do.
Maybe you should. Yeah.
They said that that's a transformer, and it's not just like, it's not a cascade transistors. It's like a transformer problem that created that distortion. And later, what they did was they put a couple of transistors in line to they would overdrive it. It's really fun. I've been tinkering with guitars for a really, really long time. I've been taking them apart and cutting them, and sometimes I cringe at the things that I've messed up. But my brother would get the stuff from yard sales and just bring it home, and I would take things apart. And so, I've seen PAF pickups. I was like, why does this say patent applied for? On the bottom of this thing, and I give the guy his guitar back with his pickup in it. But I definitely had a lot of stuff in my hands, but as far as like modifying things, I guess I know a lot about gear, but I always hit this, like, I have this theory, like if I'm playing it for about 5 or 10 minutes and I'm not thinking at all about the sound or analyzing it at all, and it's just working, I'm like, okay, it hit that 5-minute mark, so it must be good. I don't know how much it costs or who made it, but it's working. It's working for me.
It's great. No sense overthinking it at that point, I guess.
Yeah, you sometimes you just can't be analytical. You just have to just enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I say that. I'm a total hypocrite, but because I love to talk about what kind of windings the transformers were made of and shit like that, but sometimes it is fun to just enjoy it,
I was looking through like some of the other like folks you've played with and stuff, and you, again, like it's pretty diverse, with Thompson Squirrel Nut Zippers and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, is it like, is he local as well, or is that how you know him? Or
Yeah, Tom Maxwell, the Squirrel Nut Zippers, there was a big swing revival in the 90s.
I remember,
and
yeah, it's cool.
and the Zippers were sort of like the sort of real strange, unsophisticated, gutsy, kind of raw version of that. And there was a lot of people in LA who were like really slick and pro, or on the West Coast, they're really slick and pro sounding. But the Zippers had this, very sawdust kind of, it sounds like a house party, that just got recorded. And so Tom Maxwell, and Jimbo Mathis, were just amazing. And they split up, and I was good friends with Tom. And so I went out with Tom and I would play upright bass, and we had sort of the second Zippers for a while. It was like most of the Squirrel Nut Zippers with me on the bass, but without Jimbo and Catherine. And I was raised I listened to a lot of jump swing and swing music as a kid from my dad, who had a huge jazz collection, and I listened to a lot of that stuff. And so I was so happy to do that. Not that I'm some fantastic upright bass player, but I was just enthusiastic about it.
Oh, yeah.
So we did do that for a while until Tom, wanted to change his direction. His jump swing seemed to be waning.
Well, it was definitely interesting because it was like it was kind of like became a thing for such a short period of time. It was like it was there and it just seemingly, was there and gone basically.
Yeah, I mean the 90s were weird like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you start off with really heavy music, and then it turns into kind of, well, you like had sort of the death throes of metal and thrash, and then that goes into grunge, and then you had this weird period in the middle where Ben Folds 5 and Cake and
Yeah.
these sort of strange genre hopping sounding bands, that
Totally.
Bare Naked Ladies were definitely one of the people,
Yeah.
They we all had we were kind of musicologists and sort of had our feet in different places, and then how did it end? I don't know. It ended with hip hop, but the Squirrel Nut Zippers is definitely like a big swing scene. Cherry Popping Daddies, Royal Crown Review, Squirrel Nut Zippers, all those bands. You get the Gap commercial with Louis Prima soundtracks and stuff like that. And it was really a fun time. And all those bands would play. You would get this big. You get like Smash Mouth, Ben Folds 5, the Squirrel Nut Zippers, and Duran Duran on a big bill. I would come home and tell people this concert that I just played, like, in Washington or San Francisco or something like that. And they're like, "You did what?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's all those bands were on the same bill." Back when radio was like really important.
Well, like when you were talking earlier, I think you were talking about like seeing was it like be able to, you're coming from like a time where you could see like, was it like Nugent and like Cheap Trick and like
Yeah.
Aerosmith at the same time. I mean, that's just nuts that they'd all be on the same bill. I mean, it's just kind of crazy to think about.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we have that sort of rear view mirror. We have that sort of distant perspective, but all of those bands, that was their coming out period,
Right.
and they all were slightly different, and they hadn't yet become rock legends. Who knew whether they were going to have more than 2 albums in them, and they all became institutions of sound. Like their personalities, diverged, and they became these cornerstones of rock music, all in their different categories. I don't know. It's really interesting. But they weren't at the time so different. It was just new rock music. Eric, man, what's happening?
I've been listening to you two talk, and I'm like, man, like I remember all of these, like, because I was, I was born in '75, right? So like, I'm I'm listening to all of the stuff that's going on over the last 20 years, and I'm having these flashbacks of, like I went to Van Halen, like when they were playing in St. Pete. I don't know when the heck that was. That was like a thing in the 90, what was that? 92, 93, something like
Oh
that.
yeah.
And that was like towards the tail end, and like I'm listening to like all of these bands that are just, like I want I don't know. I sort of want that back. Right?
Yeah.
Is there there needs to be a resurrection of being able to go to shows and being able to, experience that live, and, there's just, everybody's missing it. And
Oh man.
I feel like there's such like a pent up demand for that right now, as soon as, COVID shots and all this other stuff kind of kicks in. I think there's just going to be an explosion of people just like taking off work and like, just going and doing things and getting outside and doing, shows and just sort of like living life, maybe
Yeah.
in a
I
way
mean,
that they haven't been able to do in the last year, right?
the spectacle of like that mass gathering, and then the focus of the show,
Yep.
that was a ritual that I grew up on.
Yep.
And that, like, for rock and roll and guitar music, there's a special kind of way of doing that. You know what I mean? You're focusing on players.
Yep.
So
And the show's had so much production value too, in terms of just just the lighting, and then going to like your rear screen projection and
The experience.
all this kind of stuff. Just
yeah,
like
that's right. I mean, you're right, totally
experiences.
right. Like the social experience of having that, the electricity of having that many people
Yes.
around. That's like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what plants it in your
Yeah.
soul, right? It just, the more sort of senses that you activate, in an experience, the deeper seated it is, right? I mean, there's been studies on that and everything else, and I think, nowhere is that more sort of seen when you go to a show or you have an in-person experience. It's one thing to just listen to it, in headphones, right? I mean, even that, right? So listening to it, in a room, and then listening to something with headphones, right? And then listening to something and also seeing it, right? And then obviously involving the other senses, touch and smell and all of these. That's where, like, you look back, right? And you just sort of re-experience it, you feel it, and yeah, so it's pretty cool.
I mean, there's a thing like, we have mirror neurons, right? Where, people get around each other and they want to finish each other's sentences and stuff. Or, you watch somebody else. In my case, like, I won't be that familiar with an artist, or like I'm maybe not totally sure about something, but I'll be watching somebody else really loving it, and it makes me happy. I'm like, man, they're really getting off on that. That's a cool thing. Like, so going to a show and sort of like feeling a little like out of sorts, and all of a sudden everybody's super excited, and just being around lots of people, that's an experience that, I mean, it doesn't even matter almost like who the super weirdo is on stage. You don't really even want to know them, but they're this master of ceremonies, and they're putting on this huge, like, great event, and everybody's just having they're like a really great host to a party, and that is just part of the culture. I really,
well
I
that's
really
it.
miss.
And everybody like enjoying it at once, almost like this. Yeah, everybody's one, and that's such a thing. It's so much, like going to that concert, but then watching like a video version of it. It's not the same at that point.
Oh yeah.
Totally.
I mean, I've played a bunch of, like, in the last few years, I played a bunch of like jazz shows, right? And people get up and play solos, and sometimes you have guest soloists and stuff. And it's really exciting when someone shows up and you're like, man, this guy's got an attitude, and then they get on their guitar or their instrument or their sax, and they go off and they just really go somewhere, and you can feel the whole entire bar just kind of go, what is going on? and everybody's like doing that looking around at each other thing, like, man, this guy's the best, it's the best thing I've ever seen in my life, and whether it is or not, it doesn't matter. They're having a great time, and just that sort of shared experience is huge, and the person on stage is feeling it, they really know that there's this sort of surge of emotion that's happening. They've tapped into something really strong, and people are going there with them, and that's a great feeling. I want us to be able to get back to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens every day, in normal circumstances. It happens all the time, and people fall in love with music because of that. They fall in love with the people making the music, and the experience of it.
I think in some ways, I feel lucky, like, because I was born in like in 72, and there's just like there's less stuff to devote your time to. So it was a lot easier to say, hey, I'm gonna go in a dark room and I'm gonna like put these headphones on. I'm gonna listen to this whole record from front to back. The liner notes and look at the pictures. You already have kind of an idea of what it is before they start playing. And
yes,
where now everything's kind of piecemeal and convenient, and that's great. I love that part of it. But boy, getting a record was like it was like an event.
yeah,
such a different thing.
Yeah, it's part of that experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, there was just, there was a lot less. It was half the amount of people in the world when you were born,
True. Yeah.
So, and there was less people to sort of like go talk to about your record, and, being bored and having to, create fun stuff to do in your bored time without as many people around. That was just a normal thing that you had to do. So looking at the artwork of the record and reading who was the assistant engineer and the actual real name of the artist, you found out in the writing credits, stuff like that. That's that yet again, this record was recorded at A&M Records. Why does every record that I like recorded at A&M Records?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, why does this engineer seem to be on all the records they like? And
because Ken Scott's really good.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's true. But that's what would end up happening.
Yeah. But yeah, that definitely, I think the experience, it's a weird thing. I feel very, very, disconnected a lot of times to new music, and I hate that. I'm like, oh man, times have changed. I'm like, don't be such an old person. The minute I actually go looking for the stuff that I liked originally about music, it's still there. It's just, there's just, like you said, there's just a lot of noise out there, and you have to sort of fight for that space where people are producing, records on vinyl, and you have to listen to the whole entire thing, and it's still, there's people still trying to do that, but it's a strange time, you have to force yourself to, focus on it.
You ever like find yourself, I'm sure it happens, where you just kind of like, I don't know, like get an inkling just like to listen to something you haven't listened to in a long time, and you're like, then you kind of like brings you right back to where you were, what you were doing, how you felt the first time you heard it, that sort of thing. Just
yeah, definitely. I have a bunch of vinyl, and I just got an old stereo. I got a Sherwood from a friend of mine who he's sort of my partner and my mentor in a way. He fixes old stereos and has taught me a lot about electronics. And he had an old Sherwood and he refurbished it. And something about that sound of that mid-70s Sherwood with my turntable and listening to old records that were mastered analog, the smell of it and just, I mean, I can immediately visualize that experience of being a kid again, I mean, I wonder too, like I wonder if that experience is kind of universal, that sort of like this time stop in that way for people who buy records now. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a great question.
Yeah.
I would hope so, because I would think something has to drive them to like want to buy the record, right. And then to want to do that again. There has to be some sort of a, transcendent sort of experience that kind of happens from doing that, you know, I would think.
Yeah, I wonder if like just the owning owning the music itself, you know, the music is now this cardboard and vinyl thing, and that's where it is. It's not in the cloud, you know, it's actually on your shelf, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a physical tangible experience, you know, and this mechanical experience of putting the needle down. And that's, you know, as strange as it is, it's really a strange process to think about grooves on a record, like, and how that's cut and how that becomes electricity. That's really strange. But like, you know, but that I think that does lead people to these quieter moments, the mechanical, the physical experience, you know, the mechanical interface with the record and all that stuff. It leads people to a path of a quieter experience. I would have never thought I would say those words 40 years ago, but I think it's the truth.
Almost like there's like a ritual to it in a sense, because you kind of like taking, you know, considering if you like think of like your currency is basically like numbers on the screen now, that's kind of what has happened to music too. It's just the idea of it being like a physical thing that you're kind of like bringing into existence by dropping that needle on it, and all the processes that are going on to make the sound waves that eventually get to your ear. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
All the sort of strange mechanical differences between these different formats that happened, you know, in between 1990 and 2000, it was really strange. We had like, I mean, cassettes were the biggest thing in 1990. Like cassettes were huge, and vinyl was dying. And then CDs. You know, you had vinyl, cassettes, CDs. Then like mini discs or something. You know.
Yeah.
And like, you know, things like that.
Remember Kiss singles?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. You just have like this much tape or something inside.
It's insane. Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, the amount of, you know, resources that probably went into you know, making, you know, that thing just for what it was. It's just kind of crazy to think about. But
yeah, and you had to wait and to rewind. That was really strange.
Or like 8-track tapes where you know, sometimes you'd be listening to an 8-track and it would cut to the next track on some records like midway through a song. You know, it could be annoying sometimes. Gosh, you know, like
and I had a screwdriver in the top of my 8-track to put it, to make sure the head's like tracked right, so to get more high end when I put the screwdriver in. Did you ever have to do that?
No, I didn't get that.
Your heads would go out of a line. Your heads would go out of a line on an 8-track, and you would have this big cartridge in there, and you would monkey with the cartridge, and it would start sounding better. I'm like, oh, you know, and then I would be like, oh, okay, well, if I stick the screwdriver in there,
hold it there, like, wedge it on in, See, that's the I don't know, the spirit of you know, ingenuity right there, just like out of necessity, experimenting like, hey, it works when I do this. So
yeah, a lot of people listen to podcasts now, you know, while they're working or while they're commuting. And you know, if we're not going to be commuting, you know, they might listen to a record on their commute, you know, or they might listen to a playlist on their commute. And I wonder, like, you know, if that is going to change things. The fact that people, I mean, yet again, music is going to change because the lack of commute, you know, because I don't think people are going to go back to commuting as much. I think this is because of the pandemic, you know, people are going to work from home a lot more, people who can, you know, and so that sort of, you know, where is that space that you're talking about? I mean, like, where's that time, you know, that you would have where you can't do anything else than listen to a podcast or listen to a record
or a book? Even like that's a kind of a relatively new thing too. Like everybody be able to like listen to a book and do something else at the same time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in your garden or
go for a hike or something. Yeah,
that's right. Or a hike, on a walk. Yeah. But yeah, the idea of sitting down, you know, I mean, it's probably been done in a bunch of sort of retro movies where the kid sits down with the realistic headphones, which I had, and, you know, sits there and listens to whatever. hipster record the revisionist history has you listening to at that time, for Stranger Things or whatever the show is. And, so he's sitting there listening to, Talking Heads or Television or somebody like that. It's just super hip from New York, but like, it is true, but I mean, I think is that kind of a teenager-y thing? Is that kind of a time in your life where you, between one place and another, when you have that time to do that, or maybe in college, but you don't really get that time again as an adult? I don't think that adults have ever had time to listen to records, to
the point that you practically feel guilty if like you're only doing one thing at a time, where like, geez, if I just sit down and just listen to music right now, what else could I be doing? You almost feel like you
have to make a big deal of it. You have to have a party,
right?
Like, have a bunch of people over and be like, okay, we're gonna listen
we're having a party.
We're gonna listen to the whole side of Clones of Dr. Funkenstein, while we all, eat chips and dip. So I'd like to have a show where I talk about how the person played the thing, I'm just really lazy, but there's a lot of stuff that technically I'd like to get into about things, because I have a big opinion about lots of stuff.
Thanks for being a real pleasure to meet you. This is just really kind of chance, and I didn't wake up today thinking like, hey, we're gonna have Robert Sledge from Ben Folds 5, like, on our show today, and get to just hang out and talk about random stuff. I mean, this is like, this is Christmas for me. So
I know, right? Well, it was funny.
I had a great time. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on.
And my pleasure. Anytime you guys hit me up, we'll talk some more.
Thank you so much. We're super excited. Frankie and I are working really hard on putting these things together and giving you lots of interviews just like this one. We just need to get some love out there in order to get this podcast surfaced. And thanks for listening.